Hey folks, welcome into a crossover edition within the On3 network. I'm Palmer Toms from DawgsHQ and the Georgia Show, joined by Wes Mitchell today from Gamecock Central and Gamecock Central Live, GC Live over there in Columbia. I'm here in Athens, and we are both getting ready for this Saturday's matchup between number one Georgia and unranked South Carolina. Bulldogs traveling to Columbia for their SEC opener. South Carolina having opened SEC play last week. Wes, first of all, thank you for joining us. How are you doing today?
Yeah, man, glad to be here. Doing great. Obviously getting ready for this matchup here in Columbia of South Carolina, Georgia. Going to be an interesting one, man, so we'll see, huh?
Yeah, let's jump right in. I think that we talked a little bit this offseason, did a little bit of a preview of this game in an offseason outlook. And I think that when you talk about South Carolina this year, it's all about the transfers. It's about Spencer Rattler, most notably at the quarterback position, but a lot of transfers elsewhere on that offense and some returning talent as well. Just through two games, what have you seen from Rattler and the rest of those transfers?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, Rattler is the big name, obviously, but several other guys, I think for Antoine Wells Jr., Juice Wells, number 3, for Georgia fans who aren't familiar with him yet, he kind of had his coming out party, you would say, against Arkansas, had a huge game, is South Carolina's leading receiver right now. You look at Austin Stogner, another transfer from Oklahoma, who's at tight end. Stogner's a guy that probably isn't going to put up necessarily the stats that the other guys do, but really plays a big role in this offense. And, I think for Rattler, it's been kind of, some ups, some downs. He's been kind of feeling his way into this offense. It's a much different offensive approach, much different scheme than what he was used to at Oklahoma. But there have also been moments where you just see the immense upside, the ability to make plays. I don't think there's any way South Carolina scores 30 points at Arkansas, really, or made even some of the big plays they did against Georgia State, if not for just Rattler's natural ability taking over. So that's going to be really interesting. A big, probably storyline for South Carolina moving forward this season is how much more comfortable does Rattler and these receivers sort of get kind of with each other and within this offense.
Yeah, those ups and downs that you mentioned kind of have been the storyline of his entire career, transferring from Oklahoma after having started there and losing his job to Caleb Williams. Obviously, two very talented players, former 5-stars, as we talk about those two. And he reunites here in Columbia with Shane Beamer, somebody that he worked with, somebody that was a part of that offensive staff during his time in Norman. As you'd mentioned these wide receivers, the name that stands out to me is Josh Vann, just because of the big game that he had last year against Georgia, the trouble that he gave, an incredibly talented defense. Kirby Smart made mention of that this week, saying, hey, they've got a great group of wide receivers. They gave us trouble last year. But then as I look at the stats, I only see one reception for Josh Vann. One reception, 9 yards. Wes, obviously you've watched a lot more South Carolina than I have this year. What's up with that? Obviously this is a top 25 nationally power or pass ranking offense. Why is it that Vann is not a huge part of that right now?
Yeah, I think that's a question a lot of Gamecock fans have had to this point as well. One of our biggest questions so far, where's Josh Vann? Where's Jaheim Bell within this offense? And I think some of it, Palmer, is just you are talking about such a small sample size. Like, they made a very concerted effort this offseason to try and upgrade the offensive skill players to put themselves in a situation where the receiving game was not just Vann and Jaheim Bell, which is what it felt like it was for much of last year. Interestingly enough, you've now seen some of those targets go to other guys. Again, it was Wells, Juice Wells, a transfer from James Madison, who had South Carolina's biggest game this past week at Arkansas. Very, very impressive kid. So some of it has just been that the competition level has gone to another level. Jalen Brooks, who is actually the wide receiver that is at the same exact receiver spot as Josh Vann, actually started over Josh Vann in South Carolina's season opener. Had a great game that day. Really has taken his game to another level. So Beamer was asked about that. He basically gave the answer, hey, the guys who practice best are going to play. And so, there's been an element there, Palmer, of, them just maybe wanting Josh Vann. Not that they've said this, but you can kind of read between the lines. They maybe want a little bit more out of him, and they've gotten more out of some other wide receivers. And those other guys have been impressive. So that's certainly another storyline to watch, not just for this South Carolina Georgia game, but for South Carolina in general, man, is how do they continue to get Josh Vann involved? They had some plays dialed up for him, specifically for him at Arkansas. They didn't hit. And, continuing to get Jaheim Bell involved as well. All I heard this offseason was Jaheim Bell could potentially be the focal point of this offense. To this point, that hasn't really played out like that. So, look out for number 6 on offense, number 0 on offense for South Carolina this week, and how much South Carolina is able to get them the football.
Yeah, having to read between the lines. We're very accustomed to that, working with Kirby Smart over here in Athens. And taking a look at some of the other players on this offense, Marshawn Lloyd is obviously a name that Georgia fans remember from his recruitment to South Carolina. Was a tough decision there. Georgia was certainly in it. Obviously chooses South Carolina. He's the Gamecocks' leading rusher so far this season, but it hasn't been all that of a rushing attack. What do you think it is that South Carolina's got to get going to get that run game going? To me, it's a lot of the same issues that Georgia seems to be having with the run game. A lot of reliance on the pass so far and not as much on the run, but talented players there, certainly with Lloyd, Juju McDowell, and then the transfer from Wake Forest, Christian Beal-Smith coming in as he continues to get healthy.
Yeah, Beal Smith has been banged up. He did play in one snap on Saturday. I would expect him to have more of an opportunity moving forward. But, yeah, I think a lot of it, man, you look back, and it's kind of weird. The Georgia State game, they really didn't run the football very well at all. The Arkansas game, when they actually ran it, they actually ran the football fairly well. It was just the game plan against an Arkansas secondary that has struggled in the first place and was missing 2 of their main starters. The game plan was to go throw the football. So I think statistically, you look at South Carolina, it looks like they're a great passing offense statistically. It looks like they're one of the worst in the country as far as run the ball statistically. The real truth is probably they're not quite as good of a passing team as it looks like they are, and they're certainly not as bad of a running team as it looks like they are. Georgia State really did a phenomenal job of just using some undersized guys to do a bunch of stunts and cut through gaps and create some negative plays, and credit to them for that. Once South Carolina faced Arkansas, they actually played much better up front against those guys. Again, they just didn't really call many runs, and then the game was kind of getting out of hand, and they had to throw the ball to play catch-up. So it'll obviously be a huge test for them to be able to run the football this week against Georgia. And, I think there is an element here of Lloyd. Lloyd's kind of an outside runner. You want to be able to get him in space. Juju McDowell is a smaller guy. You want to be able to get him in space. So I kind of am looking to see if they can get Christian Beal-Smith back completely 100% close to healthy. Can he be a guy who can give them a little bit more of an inside the tackles threat as far as this running game goes?
Yeah, flipping things over to the other side of the ball, South Carolina's defense, Georgia's offense. Like you said, South Carolina probably not as high of a passing offense as they are statistically right now, and probably not as bad of a rushing offense. I feel like it's very similar there for Georgia. Bulldogs coming in at number 2 in the country for passing yards per game, and not nearly as high in rushing yards per game, coming in at number 10 in the SEC, way down the list nationally. If Georgia is going to want to continue to pass the ball, which could be a test this week, probably missing a key component of that passing game in A.D. Mitchell, who Kirby Smart said on Wednesday as we record this was doubtful to make the trip. Obviously, it's also going to be a big test because South Carolina has a pretty darn good secondary as well. Wes, what have you seen from those guys so far, and how much do you think what do you think they're going to have to do to slow down a Georgia passing attack that has been so successful?
Yeah, it's interesting, Palmer, coming from outside looking in at Georgia. I just sort of assumed this is your typical Georgia, you have to stop the run if you're going to have any chance to beat Georgia, and then I start diving into this team, and I'm like, wow, they've thrown the ball all over the place. And so it's almost a little bit just weird because I feel like the last 2 decades, you just know, hey, Georgia's going to have a massive offensive line, a great running back, and they're going to run the football on you and go play action and but really ultimately force you, like, you're going to feel it when you play Georgia. So it's kind of interesting. I would say the thing to watch from a South Carolina perspective, one is related to an injury as well. Cam Smith exited the game early against Arkansas. Beamer had initially sort of indicated that he would probably be back. Then he said on Tuesday, his press conference, that Cam Smith was among several guys who are questionable for this week. That's a massive thing to keep an eye on for South Carolina. Their starters in the secondary, I think, are really good. Darius Rush, very underrated kid. Marcellus Dial is solid. Nick Emanwari has come on as a true freshman at safety. And then you have Cam Smith, who a lot of people are projecting to be a draft pick. There's not as much depth at those spots. So I think whether or not Cam Smith plays is a massive storyline to watch going into Saturday. They need him on the field. And then just this defense in general, man, they just lost Mo Kaba, who was really probably the best pick for breakout player on their defense this year. Had an incredible offseason, a good 1.5 first games, and out for the year with a knee injury. Jordan Strong out for the year with a knee injury. He's a starting edge player for them. So their depth is getting tested incredibly early in this season. And unfortunately for them, defensive backfield and the edge spot are probably two of the spots we were all saying before the season. They can't afford to have many injuries at those positions. So it happens to play out that two of their spots you maybe are most concerned about end up, getting some injuries hit that spot. So, I would look for number 8 at the edge spot, Gilbert Edmond. He'll be stepping in for Strong. Really good pass rusher, but hasn't been asked to have to play against the run a whole lot. They've sort of just got him in there in pass rush situations. There'll be some pressure on him. And I'll be curious, honestly, they've got some depth at defensive tackle. Do you see them maybe slide a guy out in some situations to try to give a little more strength there on the edge to hold up against Georgia? So lots of the defensive staff, they're going to earn their money this week. Great Georgia offense coming in at really an inopportune time from a South Carolina perspective.
Yeah, you bring up, first of all, I'm going to go back to what you were saying about Georgia and looking at this team and thinking that, oh, this is just Georgia of the past 2 decades. I think a lot of Georgia fans look at them that way, and they do wonder, when you look at those stats, well, why hasn't Georgia been able to run the ball so well? It's one of my 3 questions for the Bulldogs ahead of this week's game. And, Kirby Smart was asked about that, has been asked about that several times because people want to know. And he did point to, hey, if you look at the way that we've run things offensively so far, a lot of the plays that are being credited as passes, things that are going towards our success in the passing game, are actually, offshoots of the run game, whether it's a pop pass or something out into the flats with a running back. You could just as easily run that as an outside zone, as a jet sweep type deal, and hand those off. But because they are getting the players out in space, they're utilizing the weapons that they have and the ability that they have to get guys out in space. That's where you're seeing the inflation of the passing stats and the deflation of the running stats. Also, I think some of the RPOs and stuff that they're doing with a quarterback like Stetson Bennett certainly factors into that as well. He said, they could hit big as a run play, but they're currently hitting bigger as a pass play right now. So that's kind of what I would have to say about that. But you also bring up the injuries, and I was going to bring that up as well. Certainly a storyline for South Carolina this week with those 2 guys going out down for the season. As you look at guys that are going to have to step up, Sherrod Green is obviously a name that people recognize because he's been at South Carolina for so long and has played so many games. What kind of opportunity do you think this is for him? And then, on that defensive line where you say that they've got some injuries and depth concerns as well, how much do you look at guys like Jordan Birch and Zach Pickens, names that Georgia fans do know, a guy like Brad Johnson who finished second on the team in tackles last year, how much are they going to have to step up as well?
Yeah, I think they all are going to have to step up. I think it's going to be a collective effort. But Sherrod Green will be the guy who will have to directly step into Mo Kaba's role. The two of them are in a pretty, you know, somewhat tight battle for the starting spot to start the season and the preseason. And I think, the fact that Mo Kaba beat out Sherrod Green, a guy who has been around a while now, he's dealt with injuries. He actually was injured for the rest of the season on a play at Georgia last year. And so he's suffered season-ending injuries the last 2 seasons and really has just struggled with just his health more than anything. So Kaba beat him out. Again, this was going to be Kaba's breakout year. You feel for those kids, and now Green is right back in there as a starter. So, an opportunity for him to step in there and play. Behind him, that slides Stone Blanton, a 4-star kid that they signed, a true freshman. He's now the backup at middle linebacker. So as far as their rotation, it'll be interesting to see how much does Sherrod Green get to come off the field, how much does he get a breather. And then, on the edge, like I said, Gilbert Edmond is someone that they've been high on, but they've really used him more as a situational pass rusher from time to time. So he's going to have to get better against the run. Do you slide a guy out? Maybe a Tonka Hemingway, somebody who's a little bit, smaller guy inside that could possibly play on the outside some as well. I would look for that. And they're just going to have guys step up. You mentioned Brad Johnson. He's actually playing more of like a traditional linebacker role after initially starting his career as more of an edge defensive end guy. So he's been starting. So you have Sherrod Green and Brad Johnson starting at linebacker. And then, Zach Pickens and Jordan Birch are the other two guys on the defensive front. Both those guys have had really good statistical starts to the year. But they're going to, fair or not, I think you look at it, they're going to need even more from those guys moving forward just because of what's happening around them with the injuries.
Yeah, Wes, as we wrap this up here, this is a question I always like to ask folks that cover the opposing team. What is it that you think South Carolina's biggest strengths and weaknesses are on both sides of the ball? And, if the Gamecocks are to make this a game against Georgia, what is it they're going to have to do to test the Bulldogs?
Yeah, good question, man. I would say strength overall has really just been Spencer Rattler's ability to make throws. And a lot of times it's outside the pocket as well when things kind of break down and guys start running around and either a defense loses contain or a cornerback loses, sense of where his man is. And then Rattler just being able to make these kind of unorthodox throws on the run. And so that's probably their strength on offense. Their weakness overall has been, I would say, kind of their overall depth on defense, which we're seeing tested right now, and just ability to stop the run on defense. I do think that's been a little bit skewed by the opponents they've played. Like, I think Arkansas is a team that's going to be able to run the football on most teams that they play this year. So I do think there was improvement, but again, now you're talking about losing two guys from your front seven. So ability to stop the run or inability to stop the run is probably your biggest concern. I'll say this as far as what needs to happen. Obviously, South Carolina's going to need some help from Georgia. They're going to need Georgia to turn it over a few times, put themselves in a position to win the game. But, man, I think the fact South Carolina has started pretty slow against good opponents the last year plus 2 games has been a big issue for them. So you're going to have a crowd that's there just wanting for something positive to happen to cheer about. We've seen Williams-Brice Stadium, I think, have an effect on games when that crowd just really gets going. So for me, can you start fast? Can you just at least hang in there for that first quarter, keep the crowd engaged, keep it a ball game in the first quarter where you're not just having to fight from behind? You look at this past week against Arkansas, go back to last year, some of their big games at Tennessee, they're down, I think 21-0 right off the bat. You're having to chase points. That's going to be a bad recipe for South Carolina. They don't need to be chasing points in this game. Just hang in there early on, keep the crowd in the game, and give yourself a shot.
Yeah, you mentioned that Williams-Brice Stadium effect. Kirby has talked about that. Obviously, he knows it. He played there as a player. He's coached there, as a coordinator. He was there last time that they beat a number one ranked team in 2010 as the defensive coordinator for Alabama. Gamecocks upset the Tide there. So Kirby knows the effect that these raucous environments can have, and that's certainly what he's expecting on Saturday. Well, Wes, really appreciate you joining us today. Folks, if you're looking for the best South Carolina coverage, head on over to our On3 network. You don't have to go far. It's over in our On3 network with Gamecock Central, DawgsHQ for your Georgia coverage. And we'll have you covered all week long as the Bulldogs head east across state borders to take on South Carolina and Columbia on Saturday. Wes, really appreciate your time.
Hey, thanks, Palmer. I appreciate it.